Okay, then I'm going to start the session now. We are focusing on the life cycles of plants today. Before going to that, I need you to brief out some things regarding the evolution. Okay, so first of all, you all know that the first organisms to be uh, uh, the first organisms that was on Earth was the heterotrophic prokaryotic bacteria. Okay, so because there was no oxygen on the air, they cannot be respirate, so they are anaerobic prokaryotic, obviously, and heterotrophic because there is no plants. So it's the first organism to be alive on Earth. So it's a bacteria. Then they evolve to become some sort of cyanobacteria, which means they have some sort of pigments to produce their own food. So they can be photosynthesis and can be supply their own foods. So they call the cyanobacteria. The cyanobacteria is a group of bacteria that have some sort of pigments and some sort of special abilities other than the bacteria. So uh, there are some sort of special things with the pigments and everything. Then the origin of eukaryota. So until that we have only prokaryotes in the world. So after the origin of eukaryota, the other plants and animals were originated. So the theory of endosymbiosis, I don't know whether you all know these things. The theory of endosymbiosis is a prokaryotic organism that engulfed another prokaryotic organisms, like um, they engulfed another organisms to be a double layered membrane or to become a double layer membrane containing organisms like the eukaryotes. That's the theory of uh, endosymbiosis. Wait a minute, I couldn't write in the screen. Um, sorry. Um, okay, so is the theory of there's a prokaryotic organisms which engulf another prokaryotic organisms like this, and they become a membrane-bound organelles like chloroplasts and the mitochondria. You all know, right? So the chloroplast and the mitochondria, they become the eukaryote. It is the theory of endosymbiosis. Then the eukaryote forms. So you know there are four kingdoms of eukaryote: the fungi, the protists, the plantae, and the animalia, right? So there are four kingdoms of eukaryotes. Now we are going to focus on the plant here. Before that, the ancestors of the plants are the protists. So we are going to do a quick recap of the protists and then going into the plants. The protists are a group of algae, a group of different types of algae, um, a group of different types of algae that possess different origins. So we cannot like classify, this is the entire thing of algae. It is a mixed group. So it is a little bit of confusion between the scientists also. So in the algae, you have four types of algae: the red, green, brown, and what else? And the diatoms, right? So there are four types of algae: the red, brown, green, and the diatoms. So you all know that the green algae, that the chloroplast, sorry, yeah, the chlorophyll, the chloroplasts are the uh, ancestors of the plant. Um, so you know there's a phylum called Phaeophyta, which consists of the marine algae and sargassum. That includes sargassum and everything, the kelp and everything, and so you know the chrysophytites consist of diatoms with silicon and everything in their cell wall. Uh, so those are the brief idea about algae. You can go and read your resource book. You can go and read your resource book. So the next thing is we are going into the plants. Guys, can you all hear me? Or is there any lacking? Can someone unmute themselves and talk?
You are clear. You are clear.
Okay, okay. Uh, okay, then we are moving to the life cycles of plants. So first of all, we have the cognatum, which is a type of moss. Okay, these are the first land plants that is evoluted from the water. So you all know that the first organisms that was created was in the water. So um, so they are so they are adapted to live in the water. So these are the first one that transferred from the water to the land. So they are in just difficult to adapt it to the land life. So they can be seen in moist places. So they are seen in moist places because they are not that fully adapted to the uh, life on land. So okay. Before going into the life cycle, I'm going to brief you about the whole life cycle things. Plants usually have the alterations of generations. Wait. Okay, plants usually have alteration of generation. What do you mean by alteration of generations? It means they have two types of plant bodies. Like they are called the gametophyte and sporophyte. Okay, so you can see that visible changes in those morphology. So gametophyte is a different sort of image. Sporophyte is a different sort of image. So alteration of generation means they have the gametophyte gives rise to sporophyte. The sporophyte gives rise to gametophytes. Okay, so this happens in a cycle manner. So we say that alterations of generation of plants. Okay, most of the plants has this ability. They show this ability. So gametophyte and sporophyte. So we say that gametophyte and sporophyte are morphologically different. They are morphologically different. Morphologically different means they have different types of leaves, roots, stems, and everything. So we say that this is the morphological heteromorphous. Morphologically different means it is called the heteromorphous alteration of generations, right? So the gametophyte is the haploid state. The sporophyte is the diploid state. So the gametophyte usually the gametophyte is The haploid stage. What do you mean by haploid? They have a single set of chromosomes. Like, so normally we have in in the vegetative cells we have two sets of same chromosome. Like if you have a chromosome like this and if you have a chromosome like this, we call it diploid. If you have only one set of chromosome like this, we called it haploid. Okay, so that is the diploid and haploid. I hope you all know that. I'm just clearing out. So the gametophyte, usually gametophyte produce some male and female gametes. Male and female gametes. It is also haploid and it is produced by the division called mitosis. You all know it's a photocopying thing. You have one set of DNA and you're giving the same set of DNA to your next generation. So it is called the mitosis. It's like photocopying. And they get fertilized. The male and female gametes fuse together and they fertilize and form the zygote. So you all know this guy has one set of DNA, this guy has one set of DNA. They are getting fused and the zygote has diploid. This is called the diploid state. And the zygote then grows and forms the sporophyte. So this guy is growing and with the same DNA sets. Sorry, it's a bit of lagging. The sporophyte. And B needs the spores now. What do you mean by spores? It's like a small reproductive organs. It's like you can say it's like a dust-like thing. Spores that germinates and form the gametophyte. So now you say this guy is germinating. It means it is going to be a gametophyte which is haploid. So this guy also should be a haploid. Then what sort of division would happen here? It is the meiosis, right? So that there's two set of DNA which is reducing to one set. It means the meiosis. Um, is it clear now? Okay, I'm going to brief you out. We have two sets of plant bodies that is called the gametophyte and sporophyte. Gametophyte is haploid, sporophyte is diploid. They are morphologically different, so we can say the difference between the two plants. So in their life cycle, they are just one guy is giving rise to another guy. It is called the alterations of generation. So we have the gametophytes, which is haploid. By the mitosis division, it gives rise to male gametes and female gametes. Then they fertilize and form the zygote, which is a diploid. The zygote grows into sporophyte. The sporophyte then produce the spores. So by the division of meiosis, and the spores germinate into form the gametophyte. This is the typical idea of the alteration of generation. Now we have some sort of small changes in the evolutionary tree um, from the start to the end. So we'll see those things in a moment. So this is the life cycle of progenitor. This is not a clear picture. Okay. Uh, Okay, if you see a pogonatum plant, you will see a structure like this. Okay, so this the pogonatum has as you all know, we have two sets of types, which is this gametophyte and sporophyte. The pogonatum is the old one, which means that is the first plant that is able to transform from the water to the land. So it is like sort of an old school guy. So the dominant plant is the gametophyte. Dominant is the gametophyte. So as you move on in the evolutionary tree, we have the sporophyte, which is dominant. Okay, like in the flowering plants, the sporophytes are dominant. Um, but as the Pogonatum is the old one, we have the gametophyte. This is called the gametophyte. This is called the gametophyte. The in the apies you have the sporophyte. Okay, the gametophyte is the dominant plant. It is larger and long living than the sporophyte. So it is the dominant. What do you mean by dominant is it is the usual that you see in the environment, and it is the long living and it is the larger one. So it is the dominant one. This is the gametophyte. The gametophyte is photosynthetic, which means it's green in color. It has chlorophylls and it has the stems, leaves, and rhizoids. Rhizoids in the sense it means the root-like structure. But we don't call it roots, we call it rhizoids. This is the rhizoids, it is a stem and it has leaves and it is photosynthetic. So it should be dominant and it should be photosynthetic in order to be dominant, right? Then the gametophytes are dioecious, which means they have different male and female plants. The mature male gametophytes produce antheridia, in which sperms are produced. So we'll go into the antheridia. So this is the gametophyte. The gametophyte produce the organs which produce the gametes. So like in humans, we have different reproductive structures to produce sperm and ova. Likewise, in plants, we have different organs in male and female plants that produce the sperm and ovum or egg in the plants. So it is in the pogonatum we have the male sex organs and female sex organs. Male sex organs that produce sperms, female sex organs that produce the egg or the ova. So if we see, the female gametophytes produce archegonia. So this is the archegonia. This is the structure, and this is the archegonia. Like the archegonia is protected by the paraphysis. Those are the protective layers of the plant. It is protected by the paraphysis. So this is the archegonia. You have so many cells. Um, in the base, you have the egg cell, right? The female gametophytes produce archegonia. Archegonia is the structure where the egg is produced, the organ where egg is produced. A single egg is produced within the archegonia. Always, female produces a single egg. And if we move to the male sex organs, it is called the antheridia. It produces the sperms. Can you see the sperm? This is the antheridia head. It is also protected by some sort of leaf-like structure in order to protect the sex organs. Then it has the antheridia. In the antheridia, you have there are sperms produced. So the egg is not released. Can you see the sperm is flagellated? So the sperm is the one who moves into the archegonia and fertilize the eggs. So how can this guy moves to this female organ? It can only move if there is an help of the external water. If there is a water, so this guy can move into the archegonium. So after the fertilizer, the flagellated motile sperm swims through the external water towards egg, entering the archegonium in response to chemical attractants. So this egg is produced, egg will be producing some sort of chemicals to attract the male sperms. Then the male sperms swim to the archegonium via the external water and they fertilize the egg. The sperm fuses with the ovum, resulting diploid zygote in the archegonium. After the fertilization, the zygote develops into the embryo. As you all know, after the male and female gamete fuse, it is called the zygote. The zygote develops into embryo. In humans, likewise. The embryo is also retained within the archegonium and develops into the diploid sporophyte by obtaining nutrients from the gametophyte. Then the embryo develops into the sporophyte, like this. So we have the gametophyte. In the gametophyte, we have the female sex organ called the archegonium. In the archegonium, we have the egg cell, and from the external sources, we get the sperms. The sperms enter the archegonium, fertilize the egg, and become the zygote. The zygote grows, become the embryo, and the embryo grows into a sporophyte like this. Okay. Uh, So as I said that the gametophyte is the dominant one, the sporophyte is not so dominant. So it depends on the gametophyte for the nutrients and the photosynthetic ability. So this guy cannot get food from its own. So the sporophyte depends on the gametophyte to get the food and the nutrients. The sporophyte remains attached to the gametophyte. The sporophyte consists of a food, seta, and the capsule. So if we focus on this part, only the sporophyte, this is the part you have. So if you focus on this part, you can see the uh, food, seta, and the capsule. I don't have a picture of this. Wait, I'll show you. Okay, from here you have the food, and you have the seta, and this is the capsule. The capsule consists of different types of things. You all no need to know that. The food absorbs nutrients and water from the gametophyte. So you can't see the food here. It is like in the gametophyte, it absorbs the nutrients and water from the gametophyte. The capsule produces spores by meiosis. So this is the capsule. It produces spores. You all know from the sporophyte, we have the spores. Spores produced from the capsule. Those are homospores. What do you mean by homospores? Homosporous means it has the same size and shape. You can't differentiate from everything. It will be same. And if the spores are dispersed to a favorable habitat, they may germinate and grow into a green branch filament called protonema. Protonema produce buds that grows into gametophyte. So is it okay with you, the life cycle of organatum? It is the easiest one. I'll brief you. This. So the dominant plant is the gametophyte. It has the rhizoid stem and leaves. It is photosynthetic and it is dominant. So in the gametophyte, you have male and female sex organs. In the male, we call it antheridia. In the female, we call it archegonia. In the antheridia and archegonia, they produce the gametes, male and female gametes. The male gamete is called the sperm, which is flagellated and it can swim. The female gamete is called the egg or the ovum. It cannot be released or it is like retained in the archegonium. The male swim through the external water into the female organ and it fertilizes the eggs. It grows into the zygote, and zygote grows into embryo. The embryo becomes a sporophyte, which is remained and attached to the gametophyte. If you see this picture, you can say all the things. So it is attached to the gametophyte, it absorbs nutrients from the gametophytes, and the sporophyte contains of three things: food, seta, and capsule. If the food is like inside the gametophyte, which absorbs water and nutrients, the seta is there, it's like a stem-like thing, and the capsule, which produces spores by meiosis. Okay, why did I say it's meiosis? Because the sporophytes, where can I write? The sporophyte is diploid. It needs to produce haploid spores. So it is the meiosis. So this is a brief idea about the cognatum. I'm moving to the nephrolophis next. So the nephrolophis is a bit developed guy than the cognatum. So here the sporophyte is dominant. So we are getting rid of the gametophyte. So which is the gametophyte is not so good to the land life. So it is a bit good to the water life. So that's why they are in the moist place. So now we are just becoming developed, and the dominant one is the sporophyte. The gametophyte is reduced and short-lived. It is reduced in the sense like we cannot see it often, or it is short-lived. So usually you'll see a nephrolophis like this in the environment. It's the dominant sporophyte. Both sporophytes and gametophytes are independent and photosynthetic. Although it is short-lived and reduced, the gametophyte also can uh, photosynthesis, because in the previous in the previous part, the pogonatum, the dominant one is the gametophyte and it is photosynthetic. Now this ability will not go like all of a sudden. So they'll develop like in a gradual manner. So uh, they won't give up all their abilities. So the gametophyte is some sort of photosynthetic and like independent of the sporophyte. Like um, it is not dependent on sporophyte, because in earlier stage, uh, the gametophyte is the one who is alone and photosynthetic. Now he is not ready to give all of his abilities to sporophyte all of a sudden. So the gametophyte and sporophyte are independent and photosynthetic. Sporophytes have more complex structure. Like it is more complex structure. The plant body is differentiated into roots, stems, and leaves. Now, in the pogonatum, we didn't mention the word root. We called it as rhizoids. So here we are saying we have roots, stems, and leaves. And the cuticle is found on the aerial part of the plant body. What do you mean by cuticle? It is a protective layer in order to prevent the water loss. The stomata are developed on the aerial parts for the gaseous exchange. Two types of vascular systems also develop, the xylem and the phloem. So you all know xylem and phloem. So these plants are vascularized. They have fiddlehead young leaves, and the stem is underground rhizome. So this is the stem. The stem has an underground part called the rhizome. Leaves are compound and pinnate leaves. You know, the compound and pinnate leaves. Long underground branches called the stolons arise from the rhizome, which gives rise to a new plantlets. So we have a long underground branches like these, and it will develop into a new plants. Sporangia are developed as clusters called sori on the underside of mature leaflets. So if you take these leaves and see the underside of the leaflets, like this. So these are the pinnate and compound leaves. In the underside of the leaves, There are some clusters-like things called the sori on the mature leaflets. Sori are covered by the indusium and protecting the young sporangia from desiccation. Spores are produced in the sporangium by meiosis and are homospores. So we say the dominant one is the sporophyte, right? So the sporophytes produce spores. This is diploid and this is haploid by meiosis. The small structure, these are called the sori, right? In the sori, we have the production of spores. When the sorus matures, indusium dries up and shivers, exposing the mature sporangia. Under dry environmental conditions, sporangium wall ruptures, release the spores. Spores are dispersed by wind. Okay, in the sori, we have the sporangium, and when it's matured, the spores are released into the environment and they are spread by the wind. They may germinate and grow into gametophyte. So the typical story, the spores grow and germinate into the gametophyte. So I'm just doing a brief recap going back. So the sporophyte is dominant. That means it is long-lived. Um, it is the typical, it is the usual thing you'll see in the environment. So if it's a nephrolophis, you'll see these things. It has leaves, stems, and roots. It has an underground thing called the rhizome and everything. So behind the leaves, under the leaves, you have some small clusters like things. It's usually like a yellow color dust like thing. So it is called a sori. In the sori, you have sporangium. The sporangium is the one who produces the spores. Spores are haploid, right? When the spores are released into the environment, they go and germinate and produce the gametophyte. Okay, the gametophyte is a heart-shaped, small, macroscopic, green-colored photosynthetic thallus. So this is the gametophyte. It is a small one. You can see it from your naked eye. Like it is like a heart-shaped, small leaf-like thing. It is heart-shaped and it is macroscopic. It means you can see it through your naked eye, and it is green color, which means the photosynthesis. So do you remember that I said the sporophyte and gametophyte of the nephrolophis are photosynthetic and independent of each other? That means this guy is not dependent on the sporophyte. It is different. It is not attached to gametophyte. So it's not absorbing any nutrients or anything from the sporophyte. So it is independent. So it is able to produce its own food by photosynthesis. The rhizoid develop on the ventral surface. So this is the ventral surface. So these things are called the rhizoids. Rhizoids means the root-like thing. Gametophytes are monoecious. It means the bisexual. We have the antheridia and archegonia on the same organ or the same gametophyte. So we call it as bisexual or the monoecious. Antheridia and archegonia are developed on the ventral side. So this is the ventral side. You have the antheridia. What do you mean by antheridia? The male organ. The archegonia is the female organ. Antheridium produces flagellated sperms and release them into the external environment. Archegonium produces one egg and retains it. Motile sperm swims through the external water towards the egg and entering the archegonium in response to the chemical attractants. Sperm fuses the egg. So the same story. In the pogonatum, we have the male and female organs in different plants. So it needs a long journey to swim from the male plant to the female plant and enter the archegonium and fertilize the eggs. But here we have the female organ and male organ on the same gametophyte, and even though the sperms are flagellated, it it released to the external environment. Through the external water, it comes to the archegonia and fertilize the egg. So the same story, the egg develops into the zygote develops into the embryo, and the embryo develops into sporophyte while retained in the gametophyte. After the fertilization, zygote develops into embryo, and it will finally develop into gametophyte, nourished by the gametophyte. After the so here we said that the sperm enters the archegonium, and fertilize the eggs. After the fertilization, it becomes a zygote and the embryo, right? The embryo will be retained in the gametophyte, uh, and the embryo will grow into sporophyte. It also retained in the gametophyte for a little while. After it acquires the ability to photosynthesis, it will be released. So the same story here, but a little bit different. So the typical one is sporophyte. It is the dominant one. It is the photosynthetic. It has these parts, roots, stems, and leaves, or everything. So behind the leaves or underside of the leaf, you have the sori. In the sori, you have the sporangium. Sporangium produces spores by meiosis. The spores are released into the environment by the wind. It germinates and produces the gametophyte. This is the gametophyte, which is a heart shape, macroscopic, and photosynthetic. It is green in color. It is the bisexual or the monoecious part. It has the archegonium and antheridia on the same side, on the ventral side, and it has rhizoids, root-like thing. And in the antheridia, the flagellated sperm is produced and released into the external water. From the external water, it comes to the archegonia and fertilizes the only egg and remained in the archegonia, grows into zygote, embryo, and the sporophyte. And that's the thing, the sporophyte, and again the cycle will start. Uh, did you all understand? Did you all understand? Okay. Sorry, I didn't see the message. So the dominant is, someone has asked what is dominant. Dominant is the one which is usually can be seen on the environment. So it has the ability to produce its own food, and it is long lived than the other part, the counteract part. So it is called the dominance. Dominant means like it is the powerful one. It is the strongest one than the other. It is a long lived, and it can be usually seen in the environment. So it can withstand the land life. That is the dominant one. Okay. And the next, it is dioecious. Dioecious means, so monoecious means we have the female sex organ and male sex organ in the same plant or in the same organism. It is called the monoecious. Dioecious means in the pogonatum. In the pogonatum, we have the male sex organ and female sex organ in different plants. So it is not on the same plant. It is in different plants. It's in so if you say like you have a pogonatum like this, we call it female pogonatum, so female gametophyte, and you have a male pogonatum, and in the apex only you will develop the antheridia and archegonia. So if it's a female plant, you will develop a archegonia, and it is covered by these things. Okay. And if it's a male plant, you will develop an antheridia. Sorry, you'll develop an antheridia, right? So those are in two different individual plants. So it is called the dioecious. If it's monoecious, both the sexes are in the same plant. Uh, Okay. Do you want me to recap those two things? No, right? So I'm moving to the next thing, the Selaginella. Uh, Okay, we started from the Phogonaton. So we know that from the earliest it is from the water and it loves to be near the water, so it can be seen on the moist area. And it is not, it is like an old school guy, it is not that much developed. And the dominant one is the gametophyte. So the gametophyte produces the gametes, the male and female gametes, and it fuses and produces the zygote. Zygote grows into the sporophyte. The sporophyte produces spores by the meiosis, and the spores are germinated and produce the gametophyte. The cycle begins again. In the nephrolophys, a slight different because we have the dominant sporophyte. Underside the leaf, you have a structure called the sori. If you find a nephrolophys man, you can see the underside of the leaf is so rough. It is like a small dust-like thing under the leaf, a yellow color one. Inside the sora, you have sporangium, its spores, and the spores. Like you guys remember this like a story. Then you won't forget. And moreover than the notes, just look at the pictures on the internet and see what is the sora, why this is happening, and everything. So you will remember thing. You will not forget. So for the nephrolophys, you have the leaf and the sora. Now we are and the heart-shaped gametophyte. And we are moving to the Selaginella now. Hmm. Okay, so we are moving forward to the advanced level. So we are just the sporophyte is the dominant one. So back with the Phogonatum, we have the gametophyte is the dominant one. Now we are moving toward the advanced stages. So the Selaginella also we have the sporophytes are dominant and photosynthetic. Photosynthetic means they can produce their own food, so they are dominant. So this is the vegetative thing. Yeah, this is the Selaginella you can see. Gametophytes are reduced in structure and short-lived, partially depend on the sporophytes. So here they are saying that uh, gametophyte is reduced and short-lived, even though it is reduced and it is partially dependent on the sporophyte. So in the nephrolophys, we said that the gametophyte is independent of sporophyte, which means it can produce their own food. It is green in color and everything. But in the Selaginella also we have the gametophyte, but it is partially dependent on the sporophyte. Sporophyte plant is differentiated into roots, stems, and leaves. See, here we have root, stems, and leaves. Okay, and it is the vascular plant. We got the vascular uh, in the nephrolophys itself, right? We got the phloem and the xylem. So here also we have the vascular. The heterophyllous leaves are arranged as pairs. What do you mean by heterophyllous leaves? Heterophyllous leaves are arranged as pairs. It means we have different size of leaves. Like the female and male plants contains different size of leaves which are different from each other. So that is called the heterophyllous leaves are arranged as pairs. Stem is dorsoventrally flattened. Sporangia are borne on the specialized leaves called the sporophylls. Sporophylls are compactly arranged in terminal strobilus. Um, it, strobilus. This is the strobilus. Two types of sporophylls called the megasporophyll and the microsporophyll are arranged in the same strobilus. So we say that the sporophyte is the dominant. So this is the sporophyte. It has leaves and everything. And the leaves are arranged into a structure called the strobilus. Okay, the two types sporophylls are compactly arranged in the terminal strobilus. So two types of sporophylls called the megasporophyll and microsporophyll are arranged in the same strobilus. You can see this is a strobilus. So this is a strobilus. The strobilus is covered by the leaves. So the megasporophyll is covered. So the megasporangium is covered by the megasporophyll. The microsporangium is covered by the microsporophylls. Okay. Uh, Wait, I'll tell you again. One of the specialized leaves for the sporophyll. So in the sporophyte, you have sporophyll. What is sporophyll? Sporophyll is the specialized leaves. Okay, the sporophylls are specialized leaves. The sporophylls are arranged around the strobilus. Two types of sporophylls are there. So we have the two types of sporophylls, megasporophylls and microsporophylls. Megasporophyll produces a single megasporangium and microsporophyll produces a single microsporangium. If you see, so this is a sporophyte. In the sporophyte, you have a strobilus. Strobilus is like a cone-like structure that is made up of the sporophylls, like the sporophylls are covering it. So we call the structure as the strobilus. So if you take this, if you cut this structure and take a cross section like this, you can see the things like this. So in this structure, we have the leaves. So the leaves are called sporophylls here. We don't call it leaves, we call it sporophylls. So there are two types of leaves, megasporophylls and microsporophylls. So the megasporophylls covers the megasporangium. See, this is the megasporophyll. It covers the megasporangium. And you have the microsporangium, which is covered by the microsporophylls. Okay, so I'm just like briefing you out in this. In the Selaginella, the sporophyte is the dominant one. So it has those parts, leaves, roots, and etc. thing. The main thing is in the apex you have the cone-like structure called the strobilus. What is strobilus? It's a cone-like thing that is made up of the leaves. The leaves are covering, and the sex organs are also there. So no, the sporangium is also there. So we have the strobilus. The strobilus is made up of leaves. We don't call it leaves here. We call it sporophyll. So two types of sporophylls are there, megasporophylls and microsporophylls. Megasporophylls covers the megasporangium. Microsporophyll covers the microsporangium. Okay. The megasporophyll produces single megasporangium and the microspores produce a single microsporangium. Morphologically, two different types of spores are produced. This nature is called the heterospory. So far, in the Pogonatum and the Nephrolophes, the sporophyte plant produces spores. You all know it's the dust-like thing produced by the sporophyte. So it is the haploid part, and it all looks the same size and color. It's like uniform. So we call it homospory. Like in the Pogonatum also, in the Pogonatum, the dominant one is the gametophyte, and they fuse and the embryo goes into the sporophyte. In the sporophyte, you have the capsule. In the capsule, the spores are produced. The spores are same size in color, so you can't differentiate this one is the male, this spore is going to be the male plant, this spore is going to be the female plant. You can't differentiate because it those looks like same, and eventually when it germinates only you can identify this is the male gametophyte, this is the female gametophyte. So we call it homospory. In the nephrolophis also, the sporophyte is the dominant one. In underside of the leaf we have the sori sporangium. In the sporangium we produce spores. These spores are also homospory. You can't differentiate like so this spore is going to germinate going to be a male plant, or this spore is going to be a female plant. You can't differentiate it because the male and female organs are on the same gametophyte. But in the selaginella, that is not homospory, it is heterospory. Heterospory means you can say that there are two different sizes of spores that you can differentiate into male and female, and you can say, okay, this spore is going to germinate and give a male plant. This spore is going to germinate and give a female plant. So you can say that the sizes and the visual difference in these spores. So that is called the heterospory. So that's why this is the sporophyte. The sporophyte is covered on the leaf in the strobilus. If you cut these strobilus in half, like in the longitudinal pay, you'll see these structures. In these structures, you have the microsporangia and you have the megasporangia. Those two are covered by the respective sporophylls of it. What do you mean by sporophyll? It's specialized leaf. So the megasporophyll and the microsporophyll, those are covered by it. Uh, and the megasporophyll produce the megaspore. The megasporangium produce the megaspore. The microsporangium produce the microspore. Morphologically, two different types of spores, so we call it heterospory. Megasporangium produces four large megaspores. Okay, so the megasporangium produces four large megaspores. Wait, I'll show you a thing. Okay, do you have any doubts to clear? So in the cell, I'm just repeating the thing, so sorry for that. So the selaginella, the dominant one is the sporophyte. It has these sort of parts, the roots, stems, and leaves, and everything. In the sporophyte, uh, we have the sporophyll. It is a specialized leaf. There are two types of sporophylls, megasporophyll and microsporophyll. So we have a structure called strobila in there. The strobila is the part which consists of the sporangium. This is the part that contains the sporangium, so we call it the strobilus. Okay, the strobilus is covered by the megasporophyll and microsporophyll. If you cut it longitudinally, you can see the megasporangium and microsporangium. So a megasporophyll covers the megasporangium. A microsporophyll covers the microsporangia. From that sporangia only, you will get the spores. So the spores are in different sizes. So we classify into megaspores and microspores. So megasporangium produce four large megaspores. Um, Microspore. This is the microspore thing. This is the male part. Okay, this here. Uh, I don't know whether I have a good picture. Okay, I'll just brief you out here. From the mega pharyngeum, we get four megaspores. Usually the female produce only one egg, right? But here we produce four megaspores. Uh, Sorry, this is not the egg part. This is the sporified stage, right? Uh, by meiosis, the microsporangium produce numerous small microspores by meiosis. So, like in same manner, the microsporangium produces numerous amount of microspores. We cannot count it, so it's a numerous amount. Both types of spores have thick or tough walls. Microspores retain in the microsporangium and develop into young male gametophytes. So far in the Nephrolophis and the Prognathum, we said that the spores are released to the environment and they are germinating. But here, there are two types of spores, so it is a little bit of complex parts than the previous. So here, the microspores are not released. They are retained in the microsporangium and developed into the male gametophytes. The young male gametophytes are enclosed by the wall of microspore, which are released by the microsporangium. Young male gametophytes are enclosed by the in the external environment, they become mature male gametophytes. So I don't have a clear picture of that. Wait, I'll show you. So this is the microsporangium, right? This is the microsporangium. In the microsporangium, you have the microspores. Here you have the microspores. You have the microspores. The microspores are not released to the environment. They retain and they grow inside and they become the male gametophytes. So in other cases, we saw that the spores are releasing to the environment. They are getting in a may what they are getting into a habitat which is help for them to germinate and they are germinating into the gametophytes. But here the microspores are retained in the microsporangium and then developing into a gametophyte. In the external environment, they become mature male gametophytes. Male gametophyte is microscopic, enclosed in the microspore wall, non-photosynthetic, depend on stored food. So, so they are not entering the external environment. So can you all see the gametophyte of Selaginella outside? No, right? It is like retained in the microsporangium and they are becoming gametophyte inside the sporangium. So that is, we cannot see, it is microscopic. Microscopic means you cannot see and non-photosynthetic because it is trapped inside. It cannot produce its own food and it depends on the stored food. Uh, Let me see this. The male gametophytes produce flagellated sperms and release them into the external environment. Okay, that guy is trapped in the microsporangium and so that guy has no other way but to develop inside. So the microspores are retained in the microsporangium, so it can't go outside. It develops into the male gametophyte inside itself. Sorry, inside itself. And it produces the spores as it is inside. Okay, the male gametophytes produce flagellated sperms and release them into the external environment. So in the Selaginella, the case is a little bit different because we have the heterospory thing and the spores are not released. The microspores are not released as usual. It is retained on the microsporangium and that guy has no other way but to develop inside. So it's developing, the microspores are developing into the male gametophyte within the microsporangium and no way. So it also getting matured and it producing the sperms inside. After producing the sperms, it releases the sperms, right? I don't have a good picture. Wait, I'll show you. Oh, here. So the microspore is retained inside. It becomes the gametophyte. The gametophyte have, the antheridia cells are there. So they are just dividing like this. One cell, two cell, four cells. They are dividing and finally they are producing the sperms. The sperms are called the enterozoid. Okay. So that's the case with the microspores. Now we have another type of spores called the megaspores, right? The female part. The megaspores are released into the external environment. In the external environment, they develop into the female gametophytes. So the case is a bit different here. Usually, all the spores are released into the environment, but in the Selaginella, the male spore is retained, but the female spore is released. So in the external environment, they develop into the female gametophyte. The female gametophyte is multicellular, surrounded by a thick wall of megaspore. Few rhizoids develop. So this is the female gametophyte. So wait, it's a little bit confusing, so I'm just showing you. The Selaginella. What is with the Selaginella? The sporophyte is the dominant one. You have different parts, roots, leaves, and everything. So in the sporophyte, we have leaves. What is that leaves? Specialized leaves. It is called the sporophylls. You have two types of sporophylls. Megasporophylls, sorry, microsporophylls. So in the, just imagine this is the Selaginella plant. Please excuse my drawing. The Selaginella plant, you have the leaves. So in a particular part, you will develop the sporangia. Okay, what is the sporangium? It is the reproductive organ. In a particular part, you will develop the reproductive organs. That part is covered by those megasporophyll and microsporophyll, which means the leaves, and we call that particular part as the strobilus. It's usually like a cone-like thing covered by the sporophyll, which means leaves. Inside that you have the reproductive organs. Like, okay, then you're cutting this in a longitudinal section. If you cut, you will get the leaf, you'll get an axis, right? Sorry, you'll get a leaf. So surround inside of the leaf, you will have a sporangia. Likewise, you have so many things, and you have another small sporangia. So there's a big sporangium that is called the megasporangium, and you have a small sporangium which is called the microsporangium. The megasporangium is covered by the megasporophyll, which is a leaf. The microsporangium is covered by the microsporophyll, which is also a leaf. Okay. Now, these are the structures which produce the spores, right? So the megasporophyll, microsporophyll. So usually we have, in the previous cases, we have only one type of sporophylls. That means it's uniform. We cannot differentiate who's male and who's female. But in the Selaginella, we have two types of sporangia. So the two types of sporangia produce two types of spores. Uh, Microsporangium produces microspores. It is numerous. There's a lot of. And the megasporangium produce megaspores. How many megaspores? There are only 4, right? Usually, in the previous cases, we said that spores retained in the microsporangia. So this guy is like trapped in the uh, microsporangium. So initially there are spores, microspores. So the spores are not released. So this guy has no other way but to develop inside. So the spores are inside, developing inside into the gametophyte. Assume this as the gametophyte inside. No, there are no spores. It is the gametophyte. Okay. Now the gametophyte also has no way but to develop inside. Now it is developing into sperms, right? Developing into sperms. Eventually, only the sperms are released into the environment. Okay. Did you all get this? Okay. So it's not the typical thing. It's a little bit different. These microspores are not released. They are retained in the microsporangium, cannot go outside, but to develop inside. The microspores are developing into the gametophyte, and the gametophytes develop into the sperms, and the sperms then only they are released. Okay, this is with the male part. Now we'll go to the female part. So the female part is, so there are four megaspores, right? So the 4 are released. They are released. They are released to the external environment and they are germinating into a female gametophyte. Right? They are developing into female gametophyte. It is a multicellular surrounded by a thick wall with a few rhizoids. Photosynthetic but partially dependent on the store food in the megaspore. Okay, now tell me, the gametophyte here, this guy is trapped, right? So this guy has no other chance to produce its own food but to depend on the stored food. So this is totally depend on the stored food. But this female part, so the uh, she has the independence, right? She goes outside, she germinates, and she's independent. Like she's not trapped like this guy. She's independent, and she can produce her own food. So it is photosynthetic, but not for so long. It partly depends on the stored food as well. Uh, okay, I'll show you the picture of the megas, mm, germinated megas. This is the megaspore, the female part, which goes outside and develop into a female gametophyte, right? Develop into a female gametophyte. So it is multicellular. It is multicellular and it has a thick wall. So in the female gametophyte, we have the female sex organ, which is archegonia. And the archegonia develop at the superficial region and are fully embedded in the gametophytic tissue. So this is the gametophyte, right? It is the germinated spore from the megaspore.
It is the gametophyte multicellular layer. It has some sort of few rhizoids also. In the superficial region. Superficial means in the surface. The surface region, we have the archegonia, which is the female sex organ. One egg is produced inside the archegonia. So inside the archegonium, there might be a picture, but I don't have a picture. So inside the archegonium, we develop the egg. The sperm swims towards the egg and using the flagella through external water, entering into the archegonium, and for the same story, the same old story. The sperm swims through the external water, enter the archegonia, fertilize the egg, and become the zygote. The zygote develops to form an embryo. Then the embryo develops into the young sporophyte by obtaining nutrients from the female gametophyte. Sporophyte generation is larger and more complex form in the alteration of generation. Okay, you all got the story, right? The sporophyte is the dominant. It has leaves. It has strobilus. The strobilus, in the strobilus, you have the megasporangium and microsporangium. The megasporangium produces the megaspores. The microsporangium produces the microspores, which is called as the heterospory. Okay, and two things are happening in those two. The microsporangium, it's not released, it retains, it trapped, so it's growing into the gametophyte and it it releasing the sperms eventually. The megaspore is releasing, it's germinating. Okay, it's germinating like this. We have the rhizoids like this. Inside, it is the gametophyte. Inside the gametophyte, you have the okay, the female gametophyte is here. The round like thing. So the female gametophyte is here. Inside the female gametophyte, you have the archegonia, which is the usual female sex organ. In the archegonia, you are producing one egg. Okay, the egg is not going anywhere. So this sperms, it comes to the archegonia and fusing with this egg, and then it becomes the zygote, which is the diploid. The zygote develops into embryo, and the embryo finally develops into the sporophyte. And the cycle begins again. Okay, that's sporophyte like. Can someone unmute and say that you all got this? Because it's a little bit different story than the previous, right? It's not the simple one. Can someone say that you all understood the life cycle of the Selaginella?
Understood, ma'am.
Okay. So, do you all need a break or something before we move to the cycles?
No.
Can you explain the mega and microsporophyll part? Okay. Okay. The sporophyte is there. It is the usual plant you will see on the in the environment. Okay. The sporophyte has specialized leaves. So usually we call it as leaves in a plant, but we have a specialized leaves called the sporophyll. Okay, we don't call it as leaves. We call it sporophylls, which means leaves. Basically, it's leaves. So there are two types of leaves in this Selaginella, megasporophyll and microsporophyll. Okay, megasporophyll and microsporophyll. Okay, the megasporophyll covers the megasporangium. The microsporophyll covers the microsporangium. Okay, basically it's leaf. It's like protecting the reproductive organs. usually the reproductive organs are protected because if it's damaged, we can't produce another generation. So usually they protect their reproductive organs by those structures. In the previous progenitor and nephrolophis also, they protect their reproductive organs by the prophysis or something. There are things you don't want to know that, but here in the Selaginella, we have the microsporophyll and the megasporophyll. Those are basically leaves. The leaves surround the megasporangium is megasporophyll. The leaves that surround the microsporangium is the microsporophyll. Okay. Okay. We are starting from the cycle. So we are moving forward. So the plants are well developed and well advanced. So obviously, the sporophyte should be the dominant stage. Okay, the sporophytes are the dominant photosynthetic plants in the life cycle. Gametophytes have reduced and depend on the sporophyte throughout its life. So if you see the pattern of the gametophyte in the progenitor, the gametophyte is the one who is dominant. So he is the powerful guy, he's the strong guy. Moving towards the nephrolophis, the sporophyte is the dominant. The gametophyte is reduced and short-lived, even though it has the ability to photosynthesis and be independent of the sporophyte. So even though that guy has given up his uh, post of the dominant, is the post of the dominant, he has given up. But even though he is not ready to give in all of his ability, like all of a sudden, he's not giving up all of things. So he is photosynthetic. Moving to the Selaginella, the sporophyte is the dominant one, the gametophyte is the reduced one. So if you see the pattern, the gametophyte, the male gametophyte is like retained, trapped inside the sporophyte. So like he's like gradually getting rid of his abilities. The here also the gametophyte is there. It is partially photosynthetic. Like first of all, he is like totally dominant. Then in the nephrolophis, he is independent. He can photosynthetic and he can supply all of his uh, food demand. But in the Selaginella, he can do a little bit of photosynthesis, but he cannot fulfill his whole needs. So it is partially dependent. Now coming towards the cycles, the gametophyte, like it is like it has like uh, uh it has like what? It has lost all of its dominant thing. It has lost its ability to photosynthetic, and it is like depend on the sporophyte throughout its life. Okay, then the sporophyte, now we are just, the sporophyte is the dominant, right? The gametophyte is the reduced and it is depend on the sporophyte. So this is the sporophyte. So in the environment, you usually see this as a cycles. The sporophyte are perennial tree with roots, stems, and leaves. So it is a little more advanced, right? So we can see the morphology of a typical tree like thing. So we have a root, we have a stem, and we have leaves. Stem is unbranched, columnar, and woody. The stem is unbranched. So typically, if you take a mango tree, you can see it is like this. It has what? Sorry about that. What's happening? So this is the sporophyte. It has root, stem, and leaves. The stem is unbranched. Okay, unbranched means you can see a tree like this, it's a branch. It is a branch usually, the typical flowering plant. But here there are no branch. It is a woody and it is unbranched. The leaves are arranged in crowns, like it's like crown. It's arranged in a circular manner around the stems. Uh, and the compound leaf shows xerophytic adaptations, and young leaves are fiddleheads. So sporophytes are heterosporous and dioecious. Sporophytes have developed a taproot system. Secondary growth is present. So these are, you can read it from your resource book. Sporophytes which produce megaspores are called female plants, and those which produce microspores are called male plants. So these are heterosporous and dioecious. So the heterosporous started from the Selaginella, so it is continuing in the cycas as well. So there are two types of spores, megaspores and microspores, and they are dioecious, which means they have female and male plants separately. So some plants produce megaspores, which are called the male sporophyte. Sorry, megaspores means the female sporophyte. Some plants produce microspores, which is called the male sporophyte. So if you see, this is the sporophyte. Uh, the same story, the megasporophylls, which means the leaves. It has the megasporangium is enclosed in the protective layer called integument to form the ovule. Okay. Integument has small pores in the distal end of the ovule called the micropyle. Okay, I don't have, let's see. Yeah, I have a picture. So the same story, it has two types of sporophylls, which means two types of leaves. In the megasporophylls, we have the megasporangium. See, this is the different types of what do you call, gymnosperms plant. But we are focusing on the cycas, right? This is the cycas one. It has the female part has the megasporophyll and the megasporangium like this. And the male part develops as a cone. Okay, the male part develops as a cone. In the cone, you have the microsporophyll and the microsporangia. Like these are the microsporophylls. It means those are the leaves, but it is so much reduced. Let's see. You can see those are the leaves. Small, tiny projections like things. Those are the microsporophylls. In the microsporophylls, you have the microsporangia. The microsporangia, you'll produce the microspores. Okay. Now we are focusing on the female part. Okay. This is the sporophyte. The sporophyte has the root, stem, and leaves. The stem is unbranched and it is woody. The sporophyll means leaves. Leaves are arranged in a crown-like manner. So we are focusing on a plant which has a female plant. So a female plant consists of the megasporophylls, which means the leaves, the megasporophylls. The megasporophylls contains the megasporangium, right? Particularly according to integument to form the ovule. Okay. Now, if you take the megasporangium, okay, this is the megasporangium, right? Sorry. This is the megasporangium. If you take a zoom weave, like if you zoom it in, you can see the megasporangium is like this, because the megasporangium, usually we call it as megasporangium, but uh, in the cycas, the megasporangium is covered by an integument. What do you mean by an integument? A layer, a outer layer. This is the integument layer. It has three layers: outer, middle, and an inner. So the megasporangium is covered by an integument. So it is some sort of special than the previous cases. So we call it as ovule. Right? So once again, I'm repeating the sporophyte. The sporophyte has male and female plant. In the female plant, we have the megasporophyll, which is leaves. In the megasporophyll, you have the megasporangium. So unlike the other cases, the megasporangium is covered by the integument, three layers, inner, outer, and middle layer. So it kinds of acquire a special name called the ovule, right? The megasporangium is enclosed in protective layer called integument to form the ovule. Integument has a small pore in the distal end of the ovule. So the integument, this is the integument. The integument has a small pore, a small hole-like thing. It is called the micropyle, right? One of the cells in the megasporangial tissue differentiates into a single megaspore mother cell. Megaspore mother cell undergoes meiosis to form four haploid megaspores, out of which only one remains functional. So we have the megaspores inside the megasporangium. Now we don't call it megasporangium. Now we call it ovule because it has a special name, because it has a special structures covered. So the megaspores, there are megaspore differentiated into single megaspore mother cell. So there's a megaspore mother cell, single megaspore mother cell, which undergoes meiosis to form. Sorry. Wait. The mother cell, it produces four megaspores, but only one is the function. Only one is the functional one, which means it is the one that germinates. The remaining megasporangial tissue functions as nucellus, which provides nourishment. So the others are for the nourishment, like for the nutrient supply and the supporting things. Megaspores are not released to the external environment. Megaspores developed into the female gametophyte while within the ovule. Mature ovule contains the female gametophyte. The female gametophyte produces several archegonia. Each archegonium produces a single egg cell within it. So in the previous Selaginella, we saw that the microspores are not released, they are retained and trapped, and they becoming the male gametophyte, and the male gametophyte, then they produce the sperms, and the sperms only released. But in the cycles, the same thing happens to the female. So the megasporangium has megaspores. We don't call it megasporangium, we call it ovule. So in the ovule, we have a mother cells which produce four megaspores by meiosis, but only one is functional. So the one functional megaspore is also not released. It is also kept inside in the ovule, and it develops into a female gametophyte. Now see, so this is the ovule. We had a mother cell, and mother cell produces four megaspores. See all the four megaspores, but only one is functional, the functional megaspore. Other three will be supporting or will be used as the nutritional thing. Okay, the functional megaspore is not released, it is retained inside, and it is developed as the female gametophyte, right? The female gametophyte. Now this is the female gametophyte. Now tell me, can you see female gametophyte in the environment? No, because it is retained. So it is inside the ovule. Now the female gametophyte can't escape, it is trapped, no way but to develop. So the functional megaspore developed into the female gametophyte, the female gametophyte also developing inside, and it producing the sexual parts, which are the archegonia. You all know the female sex organ is the archegonia. So it producing the archegonia. This is the archegonia. You don't want to know all the stages. So the final stage is here. So the archegonia is here. The archegonia produces what? Archegonial chamber. It produces megaspore membrane. It mature ovule contains the female gametophyte. The gametophyte produces several archegonia. Each archegonium produces a single egg cell. So inside the archegonia, we have a egg, right, which is the ova. The mature male plants produce cone. So now the female part is over. We'll focus on the male part now. Okay. So I said the sporophyte, a female plant. A female plant has megasporophylls and the megasporangium. We don't call it megasporangium now because it has some sort of extra features. We call it as ovule. Inside the ovule, we have 4 megaspores. Only one is functional. Now it is not released. It is trapped inside and developed into female gametophyte. And the female gametophyte will develop its archegonia or the sex organs, and then the archegonia develops an egg cell. Now we'll move to the male part. What happens in the male plant? So in the male plants produce a cone. This is the cone, okay, with microsporophylls, which consist of microsporangia. The same story as the selaginella, but here it is a cone. In the cone, you can see a small tiny like projections called the microsporophylls, which is basically leaves, but it is reduced here. So we call it as microsporophylls. So in the microsporophylls, within the microsporophylls, you have the microsporangia, okay, on the lower surface. Large number of microspores are produced from the microspores mother cells within the microsporangium by meiosis. Okay, so in the microsporangia, we produce the microspores. They developed into pollen grains within the sporangium and then discharge. So here, we don't call it microspores anymore. They further develop into pollens. Now we are a little bit advanced. So the pollens are developed. The pollens grains with the sporangium within the sporangium, and then only they released. Okay, the micropyle of mature ovule is called pollination. Now the word pollination comes. Okay, we have in the male plant, we have the cone. In the cone, we have the microsporophyll and the microsporangia. Inside the microsporangia, a numerous microspores produced. The microspores further developed into pollens and they release. They release into the environment and they spread by bees. And once they come in contact with the ovule of the female plant. Now here, let's see, we have a pollen here. We have a pollen here near the micropyle, which is a hole in the integument. Okay, if it enters, we call it as the process is called the pollination. Pollen grains enter into pollen chamber of the ovule through the micropyle. In the pollen chamber, pollen grains develop into male gametophytes. Now the story is a little bit different. The microspores are developed into pollens and they are released. After coming inside the female organ only, they are developing into the male gametophyte. Okay. So when there's a pollen chamber, you see, I don't know whether you all need to know this picture and the labeling things, because back in our time, we need to know this structure. This is an important structure. Okay, this is there's an integument and 3 layers of integument, outer, middle, and inner, and the nucellus and the pollen chamber. So there's a chamber called the pollen chamber. Within the pollen chamber, the pollen germinates and become the male gametophyte. Okay. Male gametophyte consists of branched pollen tube. I don't know whether I had a picture. But